So today we are going to talk about how behavioral economics and the cognitive neuroscience affects the way in which we do branding, and I'm going to talk about the tales that we tell ourselves. I'm going to talk to you about pomegranate. I'm going to try and show you how our view and how we talk to ourselves and explain to ourselves what we think is going on is faulty, and we need to change the way in which we understand the narratives that are going on in our heads. I want to thank, before I start, to Professor E.T.L. Dror, who is a cognitive neuroscientist from Harvard, which worked quite a lot on some of this content over the years, and Professor Dan Ariely from Duke, who I spoke with last year at Cannes, and I'm using some of his charts. Pomegranate, for me, first of all, is a very awkward fruit. It's very funny on the outside. You don't quite know what's going on. It's very strange. And it's only when you peel it that you actually have the ability to see that inside there are all sorts of interesting seeds, mysteriously linking each other inside. It's a metaphor for me. It's a metaphor for the human mind. We only see the outside of the pomegranate, and we think that we understand what's going on inside. We have all sorts of fantasies about what goes on inside, but we don't actually know. So it's a metaphor for how we need to understand what's going on in our heads. A story about a pomegranate, famously, is Persephone in the Greek mythology. When she eats the pomegranate, famously, she cannot go back and live completely in the light world. She has got to share her life between the underworld and the upper world. In other words, once you have understanding of some of those seeds, it's very difficult to not attend to it. So I'm going to try and give you some seeds today that hopefully will carry you through some better understanding about branding and how branding works. I want to start by referring to really the father of behavioral economics and cognitive neuroscience, which is Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. I'm sure some of you have read it. System 1, System 2, the idea that we got part of the brain that's really, really fast, and the second part of the brain which is rational and mostly not involved in anything. Famously, Kahneman suggests that when we make decisions, those decisions are mainly irrational. Okay? I find the tech industry very interesting because all the time, all the days of my life when I meet people from the tech industry, they are desperate to rationally convince me how good the product is, whereas people just simply do not buy things in that way. What does it mean we behave irrationally? How many people here think that they're eating as healthily as they should? Mostly don't. How many people here think that we do enough sport every day? We don't. How many people here text when they drive? Don't raise your hands. And of course, all this stuff, there's a gap between what we think we should be doing and what we're doing. The decision we make are not necessarily following what our head is supposed to think about what we're doing. I'm losing my charts. That's difficult. What I'm saying is that in the history of mankind, information alone has never changed anybody's behavior. Information alone has never caused anybody to buy something. And if anybody wants to send me notes about why they think I'm wrong, they're most welcome. They can send to Dan Ariely as well, or to Kahneman. They'll be delighted to hear that. Because we know everything we need to know about not texting when we are driving. We know everything we need to know about how to eat and what not to eat, and yet we are doing things which are completely different. We make intransitive, incomplete preferences. We form beliefs without the facts adding up, and we routinely think we have one way, but we don't. Even as we do things every day, we tell ourselves that we do one thing, but we don't. We think we made decisions because of particular reasons, but we don't. And there's a gap between what goes on the outside and what goes on in the inside. And what we very rarely try to understand is what we actually believe in. What's the deep-held beliefs that sit inside the pomegranate that we don't see on the day-to-day, well hidden by the pomegranate, that actually affect the way in which we make decisions. And all we are doing is we are focusing on the outer rationalizations, post-rationalizations, rationalizations of what we think about what we think, but it does not affect what we actually do. I want to give you a quick example. It's quite a famous one, so some of you might have seen it. I'm borrowing Professor Ariely's charts. This is a European spread of organ donors. And what you can see, there's a huge disparity between countries which are supposed to be very similar. Between Austria and Germany, for one, or Belgium or Holland, or Sweden and Denmark, there's huge disparity in organ donors. The reasons are to do mostly not with our beliefs about donating organs, but about the way in which the form has been structured. There is what is known as opt-in and what opt-out clauses. And when there is an opt-in clause, people get asked to opt into the program. And when there's an opt-out, people ask to opt out of the program. All the countries with high organ donors is the people with opt-out clauses, and all the people who don't are the opt-in clauses. The human behavior in all those cases was identical. People do not tick a box, particularly if it's a government document. So not ticking boxes is a more fundamental belief than whether or not I donate my organs or not. Okay? What happens next is more interesting. What happened next is that Dan Ariely, in this case, did a research with some people. Normally he took people who are very close to each other, who are in the smaller groups. And they all sit in a room and have a long discussion about all sorts of stuff. At the end, he gives them a paper to fill. All the questions are the same, except half of them get the opt-in questions and half of them get the opt-out questions. And as they come out, obviously none of them tick the box. As they come out, they get interviewed. And the interview is, okay, I can see that you didn't tick the box. You, in this case, decided to donate your organs. What caused you to answer that question? And the answer normally is, I grew up in a very strict family, was very moralistically brought up, school was very clear about the moral duties, and I think I should donate my organs. And then the next guy out is, let's say, his brother, who shares entire worldview in the same way. And in this case, it's an opt-in clause, so he's not participating in the organ donating program. And the question is, why didn't you? And the answer is because I grew up in a strictly moralistic family. I was highly educated. I learned to respect human values, and therefore I don't trust doctors. So the exact opposite behavior reported. The behavior itself is the same, and both people completely lie when asked why did they do something, because they had no idea why they did it. So what we are seeing is that people post-rationalize their behavior. When asked why people do something, they have no idea. And they simply invent reasons which sound okay at the time. And if we are going to influence people, create brands that have narratives, relationship with people, to think that we should listen to what they tell us is a bit of a problem. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't try and work out what they really think, but that's not the way. People can only tell you what they think they think. People can only tell you what they think they think. They cannot tell you what they will actually do tomorrow, let alone why they did what they did yesterday. So what we need to affect, if we are branding things, is deep-held beliefs, not massage some perceptions on the outer part of the pomegranate. There is currently a huge debate going on upon marketing presses, which some of you might be aware of, between these two gentlemen, Professor Byron Sharp and Professor Mark Ritson. regarding the nature of what we need to do in order to catch people's attention and affect their decisions. So Sharp says that the only thing that matters is distinction. If you're not distinctive, nothing will happen, whereas Wegrzyn suggests that this is complete nonsense, because what actually decides what people do is the perceptions they have of something. And he writes to Sharp to say, if you're right, people will only buy a book because of the cover. Surely that's not true. They buy it because of their perception of you. And of course, we know that people buy books basically because of the cover. So there's a little problem there. I think both of them are quite right and quite wrong in the same way. What we know for sure from cognitive neuroscience is the distinction is critical, but not any distinction. You need to be able to travel into the pomegranate correctly. And also that we cannot find out what people's perceptions are because they won't tell us. And trying to affect perceptions directly never works. This is a little behavioral cognitive neuroscience chart. You can all read this. It says ABC. You can also read this one. It says 12, 13, 14. And I'd like to highlight for you the figure in the middle that totally changed its nature completely from a number to a letter. And you can see that whether it's a number or a letter depends entirely on the context within which it is, and not on you. There is nothing you can do to read it differently than what the context makes it to be. So the context defines reality. It's called framing. It's a principle that got a Nobel Prize attached to it in 2002 for Daniel Kahneman. Framing, we can frame anything. Branding frames products. What people think about what you do depends not on what you do, but how people think about what you do. And what they think about what they do depends on the way in which they assign meaning to why they do what they do. The key influence on our behavior is the meaning we assign to things. When I buy a bottle of vodka, I don't buy it because of what I think of the vodka. I buy it because of the kind of party I want to have. The reason I buy anything is because of what it has as meaning to offer me in my life. What we need to do is create associations and drive meaning. And you can only do it through your brand. Otherwise, it's not your brand that drives the meaning. I want to give you two examples of how this works. I'm going to take big brands to show you how big brands do things. The first one is totally accidental, yet works extremely well. You all recognize this one. The second one you also will recognize, and that was done totally consciously. Okay, so this is the first one. So the thesis here is that Apple carries a meaning, and the reason that you buy Apple is because of the hidden meaning that's embedded in its identity, irrespective of anything else. I first of all want to show you the original Apple identity, which this audience, I'm sure you all know it, but I'll show it anyway. This is the original Apple identity before Steve Jobs. As you can see, the apple here is Newton's apple. It's Newton sitting under the tree. And in this case, the metaphor that immediately comes to play is a metaphor of knowledge, of knowing how to do things, but doing them in a traditional way. We are inside the scientific normal narrative. Famously, Steve Jobs got fed up with this, intuitively, not intuitively, we never know. And he asked the designer to draw an apple for him. The designer drew an apple. Famously, the original apple was a complete apple. A complete apple. And at this point, Steve Jobs said to the designer, but hang on, this could be an orange. At which point, the designer took a bite out of the apple. Because you can't bite oranges. The moment he takes a bite out of the apple, it becomes an archetypal apple. It's not just any apple. And a beaten apple takes us straight to the Garden of Eden and to the beaten apple. I can remind you the story. The story is there's an authority of the day. They call it God, we can call it IBM, it doesn't matter, or Microsoft, which tells you that you already have all the tools you need. And then there's a little snake who says, okay, but if you pick up an apple from this tree, you will be able to see things rather differently. And then they ran this ad in 1984, which is about 10 years after the design, where they created the Adam and Eve story in 1984, under a 1984 narrative. I'm sure, again, people have seen this before. Here's the young lady running in, and she breaks the screen. If you listen to the words are about, this is the Garden of Eden, and we are one nation, and we are united, and we already know everything we need to know. And she breaks the screen, and she basically she creates the Adam and Eve story. They only ran it once, but that was enough to create and establish that meaning of the brand, which is basically to think different. So you can see how embedded in the Apple symbolism is an entire narrative which creates an association to thinking different. The second question I've got for you is this. You walk down the high street, and as you walk down the high street, there's about 25 different types of coffee shops to walk in, and you happen to walk into this one. And the question is, why does somebody do this? Why does somebody walk into a particular cafe? Why does somebody buy a particular brand? What makes me walk through those doors? And what makes me through those doors, I argue, is to do with that symbol on the left more than anything else, because it's not the coffee. It's not the coffee, for sure. And I want to know how many times you've seen that symbol on the left, how many times you've considered that it's interesting, that it's important, that it plays a role, or what the hell is he doing there in the first place? And I suggest that this embeds a whole narrative that dictates the way in which you understand Starbucks. Normally this interactive takes me about 5 minutes to get this, but we'll do it quickly. She's not a mermaid, because a mermaid's got only one tail. She's got two. Also, I'd like you to consider what she's wearing. She's wearing nothing, apart from the crown. So what do we think of a naked lady with two legs spread about here? Don't answer, but it's quite rude. Yeah? Everywhere, every street, every high street, there's a symbol of this naked lady with the legs spread, and nobody says a word, because you don't see it, you don't consider it, you don't think it's important, you don't think it's interesting, and you don't think it affects you. What she is, she's a siren. A siren seduces sailors. As the sailor passes on the waterway, the siren invites him to park for 10 minutes and spend some time with her. This is the original Starbucks identity with the siren. In case you think I'm joking, you can still see it in Seattle today. That's the only place in the world that is still like this. And if you start to work for Starbucks, then you would ask to think like a siren. So what I'm suggesting to you guys is that branding is not about polishing perceptions and convincing me that you are good, bad, or indifferent, but it's about planting seeds in people's head through associations that link your brand to your attitude, to your narrative, to how to bring meanings to people's life. Thank you very much.